mahasiswa sekalian, and to our honored guest, Professor Mishael Barrera from Mariano Marcos University. Welcome to University of Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka, Jakarta. I hope you are doing good today. Jadi rekan-rekan sekalian dan Bapak Ibu sekalian yang saya hormati, alhamdulillah kita bisa bertemu dalam kegiatan kuliah tamu, yaitu dari University of Mariano Marcos from Philiphine. Jadi saya jelaskan di awal kegiatan ini adalah bentuk kerjasama dari Prodi Magister Manajemen dan Ekonomi Syariah ya dari UHAMKA dengan Mariano Marcos State University. Acaranya adalah sebagai berikut. Jadi pertama nanti kita akan dapat opening speech dari Kaprodi MM Bapak Prof, Bapak Dr. Bambang. Kemudian langsung dimulai dengan kuliah dari Profesor Barrera. Nah, Profesor Barrera akan memberikan kuliah dalam 2 sesi, di mana ada break kira-kira 15 menit antara sesi 1 dan sesi kedua. Kemudian di akhir setiap sesi atau mungkin di sesi terakhir, nanti Profesor Barrera akan memberikan pertanyaan kepada Bapak Ibu sekalian dan mahasiswa. Jadi untuk mengetes apakah bisa dipahami atau tidak. Dan nanti pada akhir sesi terakhir akan ada sesi tanya jawab. Kira-kira kita akan selesai menjelang zuhur jam 12. Mungkin kurang lebih itu yang bisa saya sampaikan di awal. Sebagai pembuka, saya persilahkan kepada Bapak Dr. Bambang Dwi Hartono sebagai Kaprodi Magister Manajemen dan sekaligus mewakili UHAMKA untuk memberikan kata sambutan awal dan nanti beliau akan membacakan doa. Silahkan Pak Bambang, waktunya untuk dimulai.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Dipo. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. Wa syukurillah wa la hawla wa la quwata illa billah. I'm very happy and thank you very much to Prof. Mishael from Mariano Marcos State University, who is willing to be a guest lecturer at our university, especially in the business faculty, as well as undergraduate student and management department for graduate student. So this program is called the Virtual Exchange Program, an international collaboration to add insight both for lecturer and for student. And the topic is very interesting, related to the supply and demand. In the world of marketing of our business, the demand aspect focus on consumer analysis and supply issues focus on producer analysis. I think we very happy, all of the student, to be here with your class, Prof. Mishael. I think it's enough for an introduction from me as the head of the UHAMKA Graduate School of Management Department. I hope our students are enthusiastic about participating in this program, and I hope all of you make some question to Prof. Mishael after he finished the class. Once again, thank you for very much, Prof. Mishael, for this collaboration. And Mr. Dipo asked me to make a pray for this program. Let us to pray briefly for that today lecture will be successful and useful for all of us. Let's say pray together dengan awal membaca hamdalah. Alhamdulillah. Dengan membaca basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma fani bima alamtani wa alimni ma yanfa'uni wa zidni ilman. Ya Allah, berilah manfaat kepadaku dengan apa-apa yang Engkau ajarkan kepadaku, dan ajarkan aku apa-apa yang bermanfaat bagiku, dan tambahkanlah ilmu kepadaku. Amin ya Rabbal Alamin. Thank you very much, Mr. Dipo, and I will return this section to the host. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bambang, for the opening speech. And sebagai informasi awal kepada rekan-rekan perbankan, memberi inisial di depannya supaya mempermudah diskusi nanti, dengan mungkin di depannya diberi inisial S1 lah mungkin itu, seperti itu ya di namanya. Thank you. Now it is the time for Professor M.J. Barrera to start a meeting, and welcome to Dr. Barrera.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Yeah.
hear you.
Okay, so I'm just checking my microphone. So it's nice to have to join your class today. So I am Mishael Joy Barrera, a faculty of the College of Business, Economics, and Accountancy from the Mariano Marcos State University. So it's a privilege also. Thank you, Dr. Dipo and Dr. Bambang, for inviting us for this virtual faculty exchange program. So it's a pleasure, really. So if not really for the pandemic, we would have been meeting face-to-face, but we thank the technology for allowing us still to have this virtual engagement. So I've been teaching economics for 8 years now. So I hope I will be able to share some of the things that we also teach our students in MMSU. We call MMSU as the Mariano Marcos State University. So I will be beginning my lecture. So I saw the syllabus that Dr. Dipo sent me. So the topic given to me was the supply, demand, and equilibrium. Okay, so I will be lecturing in English, so please just nudge me if I speak too fast, because I hope I can finish all the lectures that I have prepared for today. And after which, you can ask questions. If you're also familiar with Kahoot, I'm not sure if you have done Kahoot before. It's just an online game. You can have that. I have prepared something for Kahoot, but we'll just teach you later how to do it. And then, so My presentation will all be in English, so just nudge me anytime and or disrupt me anytime if there are things that if I speak too fast and there are things you don't understand. So I'm gonna share my screen. So I believe you are management business students. Yes. Okay. So
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes, we are.
so, I was actually asking Dr. Dipo a while ago if you have already taken up courses in economics, basic economics, because I would like to teach. If you have taken this up, maybe it's gonna be boring for you already if you have heard of this. So I hope you can still learn from it, even if you already know it already. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. So okay, so this is the demand and supply. And later on, we will talk about equilibrium. So we will deal with the following topics. Okay, so the market mechanism, how does the market work? And then we'll look through the law of demand, which focuses on the consumers, and then the factors that affect demand. And then later on, we'll have the supply, the other side of the coin. We usually use the coin for this because the coin always has two sides. Okay, so the law of demand and then the law of supply is the other side of the coin. And then the factors affecting supply, and then lastly, the market equilibrium. Okay, so our objectives for today, we have to understand the concepts first, and then the difference between the movement and the shift of the curve, and to determine the changes in the factors. So we will talk about the factors, how will demand change, how will supply change. And then later on, to determine the market price and quantity of a commodity and how it is applied to our everyday life. Okay, so as an introduction, we all know that there are three basic decision-making units. Okay, so these three decision-making units include the firms or the businesses. They are the primary source of our goods and services in the market, and they are the ones transforming our resources into products. You also have the entrepreneur, who organizes and manages and assumes the risk of the firm. And lastly, you have the households. So all of us are part of a household which consumes goods and services. A firm is also a consumer. An entrepreneur is also a consumer. So it works. I hope you're familiar with the circular flow diagram. So the circular flow shows the connection between your firms and households in input and output markets. Okay, so how does this work? Of course, the households demand products from the output markets. In the same way, it supplies inputs to the input market. And the firms, on the other hand, demand inputs, okay, from the input market and supplies products to the output market. So the output market has all the products that are exchanged. Okay, it produces or it contains all the products or the goods and services. On the other hand, you have the input markets. This shows us the inputs such as land, labor, and capital. These inputs are used to produce products. And take note also that payments flow in the opposite direction, meaning the money comes from the firms to pay the households in the input market. They can pay labor in terms of wages. They can pay interest for capital, and the price of land is rent. Okay, and then payments from households, they pay the products in the output markets, which goes back to the firms. Okay, so demand and supply goes in the clockwise, and then payments flow in the counterclockwise direction. So input markets, you have the labor, the capital, and the land market. So labor market, we produce or we supply them with um, our talents, our skills, and then the firms pay us with wages. In the capital market, we supply them with savings, interest, and so on to buy capital goods. In the land market, you have your real property to exchange for rent. Now, during this time of pandemic, we have been faced with so many issues in the demand and supply of goods. Okay, so I always tell my students, because some of them, they're not really interested with economics. Like, why do I need to study economics? What is demand and what is supply? I will just study my course. They always tell that economics is not important. They have this kind of idea that they do not need economics. But what I always tell them is economics is the study of decision making. It's the study of choice. Okay, so the moment you wake up, you are already making a choice, hence you're already doing economics. Okay, and right now in our current situation worldwide, we cannot remove the fact that anywhere you go, when you open your computers for news articles, when you open your television, all issues on the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted not just one country, but all countries worldwide. And it's very interesting to note that right now, people are actually realizing the importance of the demand and the supply. Because before, they do not really care as long as they have food on their table, as long as they can buy things. They do not really care to understand demand and supply. Okay, so if I browse some articles, these are articles from the Philippines that focuses on the demand and supply. So these are just some. So demand and supply factors. How does the current economy will move on because of the demand and supply of goods and services around the country. And then here in the Philippines, we have a problem on supply and demand for goods, especially in the agricultural sector. So these are realities already. We cannot go away with understanding really what demand and supply, or how does demand and supply affect our economy. Okay, and then I also saw this in ERI website. So is COVID-19 a threat to the stability of rice price and supply? So for a country like the Philippines, that eats rice 3 times a day, of course, it's really a threat to the stability of rice price and supply. So we have problems right now in addressing the supply of rice because prices are very low for the farmers, okay, because of the imported products that come from outside. Okay, so what are the laws of supply and demand? So what are we going to talk about here? We are going to talk about the basic law and the factors that cause the shift. So supply and demand is how economies track the dividing of resources and their value within a society. So there's always the balancing of the supply and the demand. Okay, so our two goals, how much of a product do we have? That's the supply. Okay, and is the demand for that product strong? So that's on the demand side of the equation. So you all know that demand is the consumer's desire and ability to purchase a good or service. So some of the students that I have encountered, whenever they make a feasibility study and they try to determine demand, it's always, the questionnaire always goes like this. If I will offer the product, are you willing to buy the product? And then, of course, they will get majority answers of yes, okay? But I always tell them that willingness is not enough to get the demand for a product. Take note of the term here, the ability to purchase, okay? So, majority of consumers have the willingness to buy. For example, if they say, okay, Apple will release iPhone 11 or iPhone 12 next year. So most of the people will say, okay, I want to buy it. There's a desire for the consumer. However, when it comes to the ability to purchase the good, some will say, okay, I cannot afford it. Okay, I do not have that enough money to buy it. So we always have to understand that when we talk of demand, it's always the willingness and the ability of the consumer to pay or to purchase the product. Okay, it's the underlying force that drives economic growth and expansion, and without demand, no business would ever bother producing anything. So if you are a businessman or if you are a future manager of a large business, of course, the first thing that you would try to ask is there a demand for this product? And the demand there comes from the willingness and the ability of consumers. Okay, so demand curve just shows us the inverse relationship of your quantity demanded and price. Take note, there's an underlined word there, other things held constant, or we call that your ceteris paribus assumption. Why is it important to hold other things constant? Because we are just looking at the effect of the price to the quantity demanded. Because you can say, oh, there are this factor affecting my desire to buy the product. Oh, this another factor. So we assume that all other things held constant, there is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. Okay, now take note, I discussed here demand. There's also your quantity demanded. So quantity demanded, on the other hand, is now the amount or the number of units that a household or a consumer would buy in a given time period at a certain price. Okay, I would like to emphasize here that your demand is different from your quantity demanded. Demand is the total amount that consumers are willing to buy, and your quantity demanded is the specific amount of a product that a consumer is willing to buy at a given price. Okay, so in a given price, there is a quantity that a consumer is willing to buy. So a schedule or a demand schedule tells you the different combinations of the price and your quantity demanded. So if you notice, as your price increases, your quantity demanded goes down. On the other hand, if your price decreases, your quantity demanded goes up. Hence, the law of demand gives you a downward sloping demand curve, which implies that quantity demanded is inversely proportional with price, other things held constant, or ceteris paribus. Okay? This means that when the price of a commodity is raised, ceteris paribus, buyers tend to buy less. So we are talking here about rational consumers. Okay? When I say rational consumers, these are consumers who are able to decide, okay? Who are able to think. Why? Because as a rational consumer, automatically, if the price of a good is raised, okay, you would tend to buy less of that commodity, okay, and vice versa. Okay, hence, you have there the downward sloping demand curve. As you are increasing the price, you are decreasing your quantity consumed. Okay, so how do we plot the points? So this is just a simple illustration. So you have there one pair, price is 1, quantity demanded is 80. So you just plot each point, okay, in your price and quantity graph. So I always remind my students that you have to label your graphs. Your x-axis is your quantity and your y-axis is your price. Okay? And then once you have your labels, you can now plot the points with your price and quantity demanded combination. Okay? One price, one quantity. That's your quantity demanded. Okay? So that's your demand. It's the whole of the demand curve. Take note that D here, okay, the D here is now your demand, okay? Each point is your quantity demanded, okay? There is a quantity demanded for each point, and the total amount of products that consumers are willing to buy is your demand curve, okay? So, as I was saying a while ago, your change in demand is not the same as your change in quantity demanded. Demand is not the same as your quantity demanded. Hence, if there is a change in demand, it is not the same as a change in quantity demanded. How does this show us? Okay, if you say there is a change in quantity demanded, it is only affected by its own price. Okay, and it causes a movement from one point to the next. If a change in quantity demanded, it's only a movement along your demand curve. But what if demand increases? So we often hear this in the newspaper or in the news on the television or radio. Demand increased, the demand for masks, okay? Especially now, it's COVID. The demand for masks increased, the demand for face shield increased. So what if demand increases? What happens? Okay, if there is an increase in demand, then we have a shift of the entire demand curve to the right. Okay, so if it's an increase, it goes to the right, and you can now see the difference. An increase in demand is the shift of the entire demand curve, and an increase in quantity demanded is just a movement from one point to the next. Okay? What if demand decreases? Then you shift your demand curve to the left, and just the same, the decrease in quantity demanded is from one point to the next. Okay? So, a change in demand is not the same as a change in quantity demanded. So, in this example, a higher price causes lower quantity demanded, right? So, that's a movement along the curve. So, changes in determinants of demand other than price causes a shift of the entire curve from the first one, D of A, to D of B. Okay, so what are these factors that determine demand? So these are now the factors that we see to determine demand. So I summarized it as point, so it would be easier to remember. Okay, first you have the price of other goods. So price of other goods, goods can be substitutes or complementary. Okay, next you have the outlook or consumer expectation of the future. You have the income, you have the number of potential customers or the size of the market, and then the taste and preferences of consumers. So let's try to understand each factor and determine how does this affect your demand. Okay, so first you have the price of other goods. There are two relationships that we have to understand. Goods can be substitutes or they can be complements. Okay, so when goods are substitutes, they can serve as replacements for one another. So a misconception here is some students understand that if they are substitutes, they should be identical. Okay, so it's not that way. So substitutes are goods that can serve as replacements for one another. So can someone think of an example of goods that are substitutes? Anyone from the group? Substitute goods, they can be replacements for one. They are not necessarily identical, but they can serve as replacements. Anyone?
Train and car.
Yes?
Or rice and corn.
Rice and corn, yeah, that's a very good example. We also use that here because since we're eating rice 4 times, 3 times a day. So we have to think of replacements for rice and corn. So what do you think will happen to the demand for rice? Okay, we are talking about the market. Okay, we are talking about rice here. What do you think will happen to the demand for rice if the price of corn decreases? What do you think will happen to the demand for rice? We are talking about the demand for rice if the price of corn decreases. Anyone?
People will switch to corn.
Yeah, people will switch to corn. Hence, the demand for rice will
Go down.
go down. Okay, so it will shift to the left or it will decrease. Okay, so if the price of corn now goes up, okay, since we consider them a substitute, hence what happens to the demand for rice? It will now go up. Okay, so they go together. If the price of one increases, the demand for the other goes up. If price of one decreases, the demand for the other goes down because they are substitutes. So if they are now complements, okay, if they are complementary goods, it goes vice versa. So why? Sorry. Okay, so because complementary goods are goods that go together, you cannot consume one without the other. Okay, can you think of products that are complements? Complementary goods, two products, that
Oil.
car and
Tire. Car and tire.
Car and tire. Yeah, you cannot have a tire without the whole car, or you cannot have a car without a tire. Okay,
Yes.
so what happens to your demand for a car? Okay, what happens to your demand for a car if the price of tires increase? Ceteris paribus. We're talking about ceteris paribus here. All other things held constant. If they are complementary, a decrease or a decrease in the price of one results in an increase in the demand for the other, okay, and vice versa. So sometimes, because I don't know in Indonesia, but in the Philippines, we have this traffic problem, okay? We have the traffic problem. So it's very, sometimes when I think about how do we really solve the problem in the Philippines, I was thinking like, because oil or gas is complementary to cars, okay? You cannot have a car without gasoline. Hence, what if the price of gasoline just increases, just shoot up, and people will not buy cars anymore? So we will not have cars in Manila. So these are just like some of the thoughts that I have in mind, because it's really hard to solve traffic problems, right? So since cars and gasoline are complements, so what if we increase the price of gasoline? Okay, we increase the price of gasoline, it will shoot up, hence the demand for car will now decrease, right? So because one family or one person in Manila, I think they have at least 2 cars that they use. So even if they have the number coding or whatever they do in Manila, it's just so traffic. Like you have to spend a lot of time on the road. So these are just some thoughts that I was thinking. Since they are complements, then it may affect the demand for the other. But of course, we should also think about the car dealers or the car manufacturers on the other hand as businessmen. Okay, so that's how the related goods or the relationship of goods affect the demand for the product. Take note that we are talking about the price of the other good. As what I have mentioned a while ago, the price of the product itself only changes your quantity demanded. The price of other goods change your demand for the product. Okay, how about your income? Okay, obviously, if it's the income, it's the sum of the wages, salaries, and profits that you earn in a given time period. So it's a flow measure. We also have here the wealth or the stock measure. So how does this affect? You have two kinds of goods that are affected by your income. Okay, you have your normal goods and you have your inferior goods. So normal goods are goods for which your demand goes up when your income is higher. This goes to your necessities, right? So if your income or if your salary increased, you buy more food. If you have a bonus or if you won the lottery, you buy a house, you buy cars, okay? So these are normal goods, okay? When your income is higher, you demand more, okay? On the other hand, you have your inferior goods, okay? So your inferior goods are not inferior in terms of the quality. We are not talking here about the quality issues, okay? But they are inferior because your demand falls when your income rises, okay? There are goods on which demand falls when income rises. Can you think of inferior goods that you have bought or that you have experienced or that you have in mind? And why do you think they are inferior? Inferior goods are goods on which their demand falls when your income rises. What are examples of inferior goods that you can think of?
Maybe something like radio, because like now all smartphone maybe have radio and maybe don't listen to radio anymore.
So exactly, like when your demand falls because your income increased, you bought a better, okay, you bought a more sophisticated cell phone that has radio now. Then we do not buy the typical radios before. You have the have you seen a Walkman or
Yes,
CD?
yes.
Yeah, or the MP3 like
player.
the MP3 player. Yeah, I think when I was in college, like all people would bring with them their own MP3. But yeah, since you have the cell phone right now that has a capacity for radio, you have your Spotify and so on, then you do not really buy MP3 anymore. You remember we also have the diskette. If you are familiar with the diskette, you have the right? Yeah, CD, the diskette. Now you don't buy them anymore because your income increased and you can afford, okay, better products in the market. So that's what happens to your demand when your income increases. Okay. Next, here you have your outlook. So you have here the outlook or consumer expectation of the future. So what do you think, for example, right now, we are in the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So next year, what do you think will happen? Let's talk about, are you required to use face mask in, like, wherever you go in Indonesia? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So if we expect in the future that COVID-19 will probably slow down and stop, okay? So what do you think will happen to your demand, okay, for these kinds of products in the future? So definitely, if your outlook or if the price of mask is expected to decrease in the future, it will go down in the future, what will happen to your demand at present? If there is an expectation of a price decrease in the future, as rational consumers, you would defer, diba? You would defer your consumption at present and wait for the time that the price will decrease in the future. On the other hand, if you are a consumer and you expect that prices will go up in the future, for example, in the Philippines, we have every week we have we have a forecast of prices of gasoline for next week. Okay, so if the news says that price of gasoline will increase next week, consumers will demand more at present because the price is still cheaper. Okay, and vice versa. If you expect that prices will go up in the future, or prices will increase or will decrease in the future, if you expect that prices will go down in the future, what will you do as a rational consumer at present? You will wait for the time that the price will go down. So your demand at present will go down because you are expecting that prices will go down in the future. Okay? And you have your number of potential customers. Of course, this is the size of the market. The larger the size of the market, the more demand that we are expecting. So whenever I teach my students, when I always tell them that whenever you think of a business, okay, if you want to do your business in the future, and whenever you think of a business, you have to think of a location that has potential customers. You have to locate in an area wherein there are potential customers. So for example, if you're planning to have a store that sells school supplies, of course, you will not find a place very far from a school, okay? Because the size of the market will always determine your demand. If you're planning for pharmacy, a pharmacy that sells medicine, then you can locate near a hospital, okay? So these are just some of the examples wherein businessmen or firms can take advantage of the size of the market to take advantage of the higher demand for the product. Okay, and lastly, you have your tastes and preferences. Of course, we are from different nations, different countries. Some products here may not be applicable to you, and some products there may not be applicable to us. So demand for these products vary depending on the taste and the preferences of your consumers. So all of these things change your demand, meaning they shift your demand to the right if it's increasing, and they will shift your demand to the left if it's decreasing. Okay, so to summarize, so a change in the price of the good, so if it's own price, if it's a change in its own price, then you expect a movement along the curve. Okay, and if it's a change in all other factors that we have discussed, then it's a shift of the entire demand curve. Okay, so let's try to see. So higher income decreases the demand for an inferior good. So demand will shift to the left. Higher income increases the demand for a normal good. So it will shift to the right. How about other related goods? These are just examples. So price of hamburger rises. So we are talking about the hamburger market here. So if its price increases, it will only affect the quantity demanded. How about you're talking about a complementary good, which is ketchup. So if the demand for complementary good, what happens to your demand for complementary good? If your price of hamburger rises, then it will shift to the left. Okay, and if it's a substitute, if the price of hamburger, if the demand for hamburger rises, if it's a substitute, okay, if it's a chicken, it will shift to the right. Okay, so for a good can be defined for individual or a market. So market demand now is the sum. So previously we were talking about individual demand. So we now have your market demand, which is just the horizontal summation of different household demand. So this is, for example, the household demand for A, household demand for B. Then we get the market demand curve, which is just the horizontal summation of the quantities demanded by each household at a given price. So for a price of 3, household A demands 4, household B demands 3. Hence, you have there, sorry, 4 and 6, you have there 10. Okay, just sum it horizontally to get your market demand. So this is just an exercise. You can do it with your, you can try to answer it. Okay, so for each of the following, determine whether there will be a movement along the demand curve or a shift of the demand curve. So first, if this is the change in the price of other goods, obviously it is your change in demand or quantity demanded.
Only change on demand. Sorry,
Okay.
quantity demand.
It's a change in the price of related goods. Demand or quantity demanded?
Quantity demanded.
Quantity demanded.
Related goods such as your substitutes and complements.
Substitutes and complement, yes.
Demand or quantity demanded?
Will change quantity demanded.
Is it the quantity demanded that changes? So if there are changes in the price of other goods, you expect that there is a change in demand, right? So remember, the quantity demanded is only affected by its own price. Yeah. So maybe you got confused with the price, the word price. So you're talking here about the price of the other good. Okay. So a change in taste, of course. This is a change in demand.
In demand.
Yeah. Okay, number of buyers or the size of the market. So all of these are factors that
Depend.
change the demand. Okay, so and then the letter D, of course, it's the change in
Quantity.
price. Okay, it's only the price that changes your quantity demanded. Okay, and all other factors change your demand. Okay, so price of related goods, tastes and preferences, number of buyers or the size of the market, expectations or outlook, and lastly, your income. These are all demand changers, okay? So I hope we're clear here. And then if we are able to understand demand side and the difference between demand and quantity demanded, it will now be easier for us to understand the supply side. Okay, so the supply side, remember, we are on the firm side and we have to think like a firm. We have to think like a producer to understand. Okay, so on the opposite side of the coin is your supply, which describes the total amount that producers are willing to produce or that are available to consumers. Hence, as rational producers, when I say rational again, they are the producers who decide, who are able to decide. Obviously, if the price of the product is higher, as a producer, you want to produce more. Okay, that's generally the law of supply. Okay, quantity supplied is directly related to the price, ceteris paribus, or other things equal. Okay, so the lower the price, since this is a disincentive for a producer, lower price will mean you are discouraged to produce or to supply more, hence quantity supplied is lower. And higher price, of course, this is an incentive for you. You are motivated to produce more, then the greater is your quantity supplied. Okay? So it's upward sloping. Hence, if price increases, quantity supplied goes up, is higher rather. If price decreases, quantity supplied is lower because it's a positive relationship between your price and between your price and quantity supplied. So it's also your supply schedule wherein as you are increasing the price, producers are willing to produce more at each given price. Okay, so just the same, you plot the combination and you get your upward sloping supply curve. So the same goes with your quantity supplied. If it's only the price, if it's only its own price that changes, you only get a movement along the curve. It's a change in quantity supplied. So what if supply increases? So it will shift to the right, and your quantity supplied, again, is just a movement from one point to the other. Okay, if supply decreases, then supply curve shifts to the left, giving you a new supply schedule. And the decrease in quantity supplied is just the same as your movement. Okay, so if you notice, these are just a mirror of your demand. So as I was saying, if you were able to understand the demand side of the equation, it will now be easier to understand the supply side. But in this case, you are just on the shoes of a supplier. You are a producer. You think like a producer. Okay. Now, what are the factors that change your supply? So we have here five factors rather. Okay, so let's try to look at each factor and understand how supply changes. So first you have your technology. Okay, improvements in your technology. So in our country, in the Philippines, we have this project on mechanization of farmers. Okay, because we need more food in our country, food security, food self-sufficiency. We have, I think all countries have that. So what do we do in order to increase production? We are trying to mechanize, or we are trying to improve technologies in farming. Okay, we have agricultural technologies, improvement in farming. So as we are trying to improve our technologies, of course, we expect that we are increasing our production or our supply. Okay, so supply will shift to the right sorry, that should be supply. Supply will shift to the right if there are improvements in technologies. Okay, the supply curve rather will shift to the right or will increase if there are improvements in technologies. Next, you have your input prices or the raw materials, okay, or your resources. So take note that inputs are additional costs, or inputs are costs to producers. These are costs that entails a producer to produce or to make the product. Okay, so if there are increases, or if the price of the inputs increase, okay, ceteris paribus, meaning if you are working on the same budget, right, and if the price of your inputs increase, what happens to the amount that you can produce or the supply of products?
It will decrease.
Okay, exactly. So the price of inputs, because they are cost to a producer, okay, affects the supply of products. So for example, in the Philippines, we have the fertilizers, for example. So for farmers who need fertilizer in their production, if the price of fertilizers just go up, technically they will use lesser of it, and it will affect the supply of agricultural products in our country. So if input prices increase, the supply of your commodity will go down, or it will shift to the left. Okay, how about price changes in other products? So in this case, if you are producing product A, okay, you are producing product A, and you saw in the market that the another product or product B, the price of product B increases. Okay, you are producing product A, you are a producer, okay, you are producing product A, and you saw that the price of B, okay, another product, increases, and this product may also use the same what do you call this, equipment, or the same ingredients that you are using. For example, you are producing bread, and you saw in the market that the price of cupcakes or the price of cakes increase in the market. So what do you think will happen to your supply of bread or to your supply of A if the price of B increases? If you are a rational producer, so what will you do? You will tend to shift, you will tend to shift your resources to produce product B, okay? Hence, your supply of product A will decrease, okay? You will shift your resources, you will use your resources to produce product B, because product B has higher price in the market. Hence, the supply of A goes down. Okay? Clear? Yes?
Clear. It's clear.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so as rational producers, if the tendency is if you are going to shift the use of your resources to produce other products that command higher prices in the market, you will supply lesser of your previous product. Okay? And then next you have your,
Professor,
yes?
so is that mean that this also like there's a connection between this and taste in the market also? Because like bread and cupcake, they're different things but similar, but maybe the market taste is maybe tend to cupcake, so bread producers shift to cupcake. So taste also the determining factor in here or no?
No. The taste and preferences only determine or is a determinant of your demand. So the taste and preferences are consumers. You are talking here about the consumer preferences. On this case, if you are a producer, right, and then you see that consumers change their preferences in the market because of the increase in the price of another product, okay, and since you're also using the same equipment that you can produce the product that has higher prices, you are focusing your attention on your supply of your products. Okay, so the tastes and preferences will only affect consumers. They will demand more of another product. Hence, as producers, you would supply what they want, right? What is in demand. So you are going to supply what is in demand because it commands higher prices, right? So the price change in other products affects the supply side in such a way that you tend to supply lesser of a product that is not in demand nowadays. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Okay, and then next year, the size of industry, of course. If there are more companies that produce a certain product, then you expect that there will be higher and higher or increasing number of products in the market. There will be increasing number of suppliers in the market. So I'm not sure in let's say for example, the cars, okay, the automobile industry. Is it how is it in Indonesia? Like, do you have like local domestic producers or manufacturers of car in Indonesia?
Don't have.
No.
There's a local, but not in high demand.
Yeah, because in our country, like we all have the imported. We have import. Yeah. We have the Toyota, you have the Mitsubishi, you have the, what do you call this, Honda. Okay, so the size of the industry in terms of the automobile industry in the Philippines is quite big because we have so much imported cars. Okay, but in terms of the locally available cars, I'm not sure if why can't we produce such, because I think in Malaysia they already have the Proton, their own brand of cars, and then I think South Korea also started as such. Okay, so if there are more and more companies that produce cars, of course there will be more available choices for consumers in the market to produce more cars, right? So we have the same economy in terms of the automobile industry. We just import, and I think, but I think we have the manufacturers here when it comes to the parts of the cars, but they don't really assemble cars here. We don't have a local brand for cars yet. Okay, and then last, you have their government actions or policies. How do these affect the supply? Of course, when you say these are subsidies, when the government gives subsidies to the people or to the producers, what do you think will happen? For example, let's talk about the farmers, because most of the farmers here in the Philippines get subsidies from the government. when it comes to fertilizers, when it comes to seedlings, they get subsidies from the government. So the idea here is the government subsidizes all of these inputs for them to produce more. Okay, so subsidies tend to or are intended to increase the supply of products. And right now, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think the government is also into helping the local businessmen, okay, and in giving like the rent that they can pay later, something like that. So these are government policies that can help local businessmen. So payments of rents, because for the past 8 months, I think businesses were all closed, especially here in our province and all parts of the Philippines. So the government did was to help them in paying for their rents. So they can pay it later. It's not like a one-time payment. So they can still produce the goods and services. So these are helpful for the businesses when governments give subsidies. On the other hand, if you have taxes, if the government intends to tax the producers more, right? So is this a problem in Indonesia, like high taxes for businessmen? Do you have high taxes for businessmen in Indonesia? Or because for us here, taxes are just, they just affect all businessmen when it comes to taxes. Like when you increase the tax, of course, government businessmen, these are additional costs to them, right? And if you are working on limited working capital or limited operating capital operations, then taxes will definitely affect your production, okay, the supply of the goods and services. You also have your regulations, government regulations. The government can regulate the production or the imports of goods. So for example, in the Philippines, for the past, I think 25 years or so, we have been using the QR, the quantitative restrictions, when it comes to importing rice. Okay, so the government has this policy, the QR policy. We just limit, there is a certain amount that importers can bring. Okay, it's the QR. And then I think in 2017 or 2019, the QR has elapsed. Okay, the QR restriction has elapsed. So the government now is using tariffs for our imports. So through this, there were many issues when it comes to tariffs because farmers want the QR policy instead of tariffs. Because in the QR, the government can regulate how many metric tons of rice can enter. So it will not affect the prices. But now it's import tariffs. So the importers can just bring in tons of rice as long as they pay tariffs to the government. So this causes the oversupply or increase in supply, which will cause lower prices for rice. So this is a very debatable issue here in the Philippines. Should we have the QR still, or should we really move into import tariffs? Okay, so these government policies are actually affecting our businesses, our businessmen, when it comes to supplying the goods and services. Okay, so these are just summaries. So change in supply is not the same as change in quantity supplied. So quantity supplied is just a movement along the curve, and the factors that we have studied change your supply. It's either to the left or to the right, an increase or decrease. So summary, movement, and shift. Okay, so again, just like your demand from an individual to a market supply, it's just a horizontal summation of the individual firm's supply curve. So firm A, supply schedule, firm B, supply schedule with the same prices. Okay, firm C's supply, then you have your horizontal summation for each given price, you get your market supply. Okay, so another, whether a change in quantity supplied or a change in supply, change in resource cost, input cost, it will cost a
Change in supply.
change in supply. Change in supply. It's a change in supply. Yeah. Producer expectations. So expectations for the future. If you're a producer and you expect that prices will increase in the future, what will you do at present as a producer?
Quantity supply.
Quantity supply.
It's your supply. Because you will.
Quantity supply.
Okay. So it's a change in price. You are talking about your quantity supply. Okay. In technology, improvement in technology.
Change in supply.
Supply. And then okay. Number of sellers in the market.
In supply.
Changes in supply.
Supply. Okay. Are you familiar with Kahoot? Let's try. Are you on your computers? Do you use your computer? Just go to kahoot.com.
Excuse me, Dr. Barrera.
Yes, yes.
We assume that most of us are not using Kahoot.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I think the exercises are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think we have already reached 1 hour in our first session? Are you intend to make a break or continue to?
It's up to them or if they want to ask questions maybe before we proceed with the equilibrium. I think this is just a couple of slides. So
okay, you can continue.
Okay, so and then we can just ask questions again later. Okay, so now that we have understood the two sides of the story, you have your supply and you have your demand. And of course, the most important thing that we have to understand is the equilibrium condition. Okay, why is it important? Because whatever prices that you see in the market, okay, so sometimes we wonder why is the price of this is so expensive. So whatever the prices that you see in the market are actually movements along your demand and supply. They are caused by the equilibrium of your demand and supply. This is what Adam Smith was talking about when he talked about invisible hand, right? So even without government intervention, the market will always have or will always go back to that equilibrium condition. Okay, so at equilibrium, there's no tendency for the market price to change. So the price that we see in the market, not unless these are government controlled or as long as we let the market work, okay, the equilibrium price will always prevail. Okay, so there are potential buyers and potential sellers. Sorry for that. You have your market. Okay. So only in equilibrium is quantity supplied. Remember, it's your quantity supplied equal to your quantity demanded. So at any price other than the equilibrium price, the wish of buyers and sellers do not coincide. So, for example, this is your demand for 200 buyers, okay, the market demand, and the market supply for 200 sellers. So only at that equilibrium price will your producers willing to produce and your consumers willing to buy. Okay, so in your graph, you can see that the equilibrium, market clearing equilibrium price is at the price of 3, wherein buyers are willing to buy at 3, at the price of 3, and sellers are willing to sell also at the price of 3. At the price of 4, higher, okay, so more is being supplied than demanded. So you have here your excess supply or a surplus, okay? At a higher price, producers, of course, are willing to supply more than what consumers are willing to buy. Hence, you have, wait, is there a sound? And then on the other hand, if the price is lower, at a lower price than the equilibrium, consumers now are willing to buy more than what producers are willing to sell, right? Because lower prices tend to disincentivize your producers and they are not willing to sell more, okay? Hence, it will only be at that quantity and price that will have your buyers and your sellers agree on, okay? So at the surplus, because there are more products in the market than the consumers are willing to buy, it will now push the price to go down, and they will negotiate, okay? There will be negotiation. If you have time, I think when you have face-to-face later on, you can try on the pit market. There's an experiment, or there's a game, pit market game. You can search on that, and you try to, this is a simulation game, and I've done this for my classes before, and it will always come back to that equilibrium price. There will be buyers on the other side, sellers on the other side, and then they're going to trade within themselves, and then the equilibrium price will always prevail. Okay, so you can try that on. It's a pit market game. You can search that on the internet, and when you meet face to face, you can play with it. So the market price will always prevail at the equilibrium because of the negotiation between your buyers and your sellers at prices other than the market price. Okay, so changes in equilibrium. So once a market reaches equilibrium, that price and quantity will prevail until one of the determinants of demand and supply changes. So remember the following. So if one of these changes, it will now change your equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Okay, so these are just the things that we have discussed a while ago. So for example, you have the equilibrium price here and the equilibrium quantity. So if demand increases, higher demand leads to higher equilibrium price and higher equilibrium quantity. Okay? Higher supply, or if your supply curve shifts to the right, it will lead to lower equilibrium and higher equilibrium. Lower equilibrium price and higher equilibrium quantity. So this happens when you have oversupply of products. For example, here, sometimes when agricultural products are in season, sometimes people will just give away these products because the prices are very low. Mangoes, when mangoes are in season, people will just give them away because the prices are very low. This is because of the oversupply. Prices will tend to go down. Okay? Lower demand leads to lower price and lower quantity exchange. So the price becomes lower if there is a lower demand or a decrease in the demand for the product. And lower supply, on the other hand, leads to higher prices. So in this case, if your product is a limited edition, okay, if you are a supplier of a limited edition product, you can take advantage of higher prices because of lower supply of your product. Okay, so for this effects on the equilibrium, it would be better if you can have your own pen and paper to analyze, okay? I always tell my students, do not imagine, because it's very dangerous when they just memorize the graphs and imagine them during examination. So I always tell them, you write it, you play with it. You play with the graphs, and as long as you understand how the price and the equilibrium quantity change, it will be easier to explain and understand as long as you write them. Okay, so now, most often than not, changes in your demand and your supply happen all at the same time, simultaneously. Okay, so they happen simultaneously. For example, in this case, supply increases and demand decreases. Okay, so when supply increased but demand decreased, what will happen? Okay, if you notice, the distance the increase in your supply is greater than the decrease in your demand, right? So the increase in your supply is greater than the decrease in your demand. Simultaneously, both your demand and supply changed, and there is a relative magnitude of change. Okay, what will happen here? The new equilibrium price and quantity will give you a higher quantity from Q0 to Q1 and a lower price to from P0 to P1. Okay, so again, you can play with this on your own pencil and pen, paper and pencils. You play with these changes and do not memorize the effects. Okay, so let's have another. So if now the supply, or if the decrease in demand now is greater than the decrease in supply, what will happen? You will see the opposite, right? Still, the price will decrease, but your quantity will also decrease. Okay, so it depends, or it now depends on how far will each supply and demand shift. Okay, so yes, any question? So the relative magnitudes of change in supply and demand determine the outcome of equilibrium. So you can play with this on. So these are just examples right now. So increase in supply, increase in demand. However, increase in supply is greater than the increase in demand. You expect higher quantity, but lower price. Okay? The effects are the same. However, the distances are different right now. So the increase in demand now is greater than the increase in supply. Still, your quantity will increase. However, your price now goes higher. So on the left side, your price went down. On the right side, your price went up, depending on the magnitude of the change in your demand and supply. But basically, both of them, if both the supply and demand increase, you will definitely have higher quantity. The impact on the price will now depend on the magnitude of change. Okay, so what do we learn from here? As long as only one curve shifts, we can say for sure what will happen to equilibrium price and quantity. However, if both curves shift, the outcome is less obvious. It all depends on how far each curve shifts. So this is just a summary of both changes. Okay, so on this panel, on this side, both your demand and your supply increased. Okay, so you can have this on your own paper. Demand and supply both increased, and you are sure that quantity, equilibrium quantity will increase. But equilibrium price may increase or it may decrease, depending on the magnitude of change. So we call that your indeterminate. So it depends on how far each curve shifts. So that the effect on the price is dependent on how far your demand or your supply shifts. So it's the same on this side. So on this side, supply increased, but demand decreased. So you are sure that your price will decrease. However, depending on the magnitude of change, the quantity may increase or it may decrease. Okay, so you can play on these graphs on your own to understand. So do not just memorize these effects, but make sure you do this on your own, in your own papers, and try to understand what happens to the equilibrium price and quantity because of the changes or the shifts of both your demand and supply. So that was graphical. So this is now your mathematical. So I think you already have your math with you. So I'll just give a short discussion here. So demand is a function, quantity demand is a function of price. It's given by the equation. Take note of the negative sign because of the inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demand. So the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. So example, this is QD equals 20 minus 1.25P. So quantity supplied is also a function of price. Take note, it's given by a positive, okay, a plus sign on the price, because the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. Okay, so aside from looking at the equilibrium through a graph, we can also solve it through mathematical equations. Okay, so an equilibrium price is defined by Q and P. Hence, the market equilibrium is equal to quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Okay, so from the above equations, we just equate your QD equals QS. So previously you have there 20 minus 1.25B, P equals negative 4 plus 2P. And you can now compute for a price. So after you have computed for the price using algebra, okay, you substitute the price to either of your demand and supply functions, and you will get only one quantity. Okay, hence your price is equal to 7.38 and your quantity is equal to 10.78. So price, only one price and only one quantity will give you for the market equilibrium. Okay, another example. So you can just compute here. So I will just give this to Dr. Dipo in case. So you have here, equate the quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. So this is now your equilibrium. Okay, so based on here, the price is 3.30 and the quantity is at 220. So at a price higher than 3.30, you will have excess supply, and a price lower than 3.30, you will have excess demand. Hence, the price is at equilibrium at 3.30. So summary, solve for the demand and supply functions in terms of Q. Why did I say in terms of Q? Because some are given in terms of P. These are called your inverse demand functions. Okay, so you solve them in terms of Q first. So set QS equal to QD, solve for your equilibrium price, then plug your equilibrium price into either your supply or demand functions and solve for Q, which will give you your equilibrium quantity. Okay, last exercise. I think, yeah, this is, suppose you are analyzing the market for hot chocolate. What happens to equilibrium price and quantity in the following situations? So if you need a pen or a paper, you can have this. So what happens when to the price and quantity of hot chocolate? So cold season starts and the weather turns sharply colder. So on this example, I'm having this like single, okay, not the simultaneous. So it would be easier. Okay, so if the cold season starts, as consumers, what do you think will happen to the demand for hot chocolate? Or higher, okay?
Increase.
So when the demand increased, what will happen to equilibrium price and quantity?
Go higher.
Okay, so it will go higher. So equilibrium price is higher, equilibrium quantity will also increase. Okay, how about the next one? The price of tea, a substitute for hot chocolate, falls. So this is a determinant of demand or supply?
Supply. Supply.
Supply or demand?
Demand.
Okay, it's a demand factor because this is a price of a substitute. Okay, so the price of tea, a substitute for hot chocolate, falls. What happens to the demand? The demand for hot chocolate?
Decrease.
It will decrease. Why? Because the price of tea goes down. So what will happen now to the equilibrium price and quantity? If demand decreases, what happens to the equilibrium price and quantity?
Decrease.
Okay, both price and quantity will decrease because of the shift of the demand curve to the left. Okay, next, the price of cocoa beans decreases. So will it affect your demand or your supply?
The price of cocoa bean decrease. supply is increased.
Okay, because it's an input of your hot chocolate. It's an input. The price of an input decreases. Hence, your supply will change. Will it increase or decrease? Supply will
Increase.
increase. Okay, so what will happen to equilibrium price and quantity when supply increases? Anyone else from the group? What will happen to equilibrium price and quantity when supply increases? Equilibrium price will
decrease.
Higher. Increase.
Supply increases, equilibrium price will
Increase. Because increase.
Because the price will lower.
Because supply is increase, and I think the price is increased too.
Really?
No, decreasing. I guess it will be decreasing.
Yeah, the price will decrease if the supply will shift to the right. How about the equilibrium quantity?
The quantity will increase.
Will increase.
Okay. Okay, so if the supply curve shifts to the right because of the decrease in the price of inputs, your price will decrease and your quantity will increase. Okay, so you can have that, you can practice that. And then number 4, protesting farmers dump millions of gallons of milk, causing the price of milk to rise. So what is milk here? Are we looking at the supply or the demand for hot chocolate?
Supply.
Supply?
Supply.
It's the milk that we are talking about. It's not the hot chocolate.
Demand.
It's a substitute.
Yeah.
Product, right?
Not substitute. Complementary.
It can be a substitute. Okay. So what will happen if they are substitutes? What will happen if the price of milk increase? If they are substitutes and the price of the substitute increase, what will happen to your demand for hot chocolate?
Increase.
Okay, it will increase because they are substitutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what will happen now to your equilibrium price and quantity if demand increase?
It will be increased.
Okay.
Price will be increased.
Price and quantity will both increase. Okay, so it's just a matter of playing. Some people will consider milk as a complementary good. You cannot drink hot chocolate without milk, right? So if they are complements, and if the price of milk increase, what will happen to your demand for hot chocolate?
It will
decrease.
It will decrease. Because you cannot consume hot chocolate without milk, right? So it will decrease, and then the demand for hot chocolate will go down. Okay. And then lastly, producers expect the price of hot chocolate to increase next month. So this is for the point of view of producers. What will you do, or how will your supply change at the present if you are expecting a price increase in next month?
Will higher the supply.
Increase the supply for the next month.
But you are talking about the present.
For the present, is we decrease the.
You will decrease the supply and wait for the
decrease
time.
The supply. Yeah, decrease the supply, and for the next month we increase the supply.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah, because if there's a price expectation in the future, higher price in the future, you will tend to defer, okay, your production for the future. Okay. So these are just some examples. You can have this mathematical. Okay. So 3 important things that we have learned. So first of all, you have heard this over and over, the ceteris paribus assumption, keep other things equal. Okay, the law of demand will not work if the other things are not equal, if this assumption is not used. Okay, so there is a difference between a movement along the curve, which is only through the price, okay, the own price, and the shift of the curve which is affected by all other factors that we have discussed. Okay? And then lastly, know the meaning of the three basic concepts of demand, supply, and equilibrium, and how we can apply them. So we have examples. So as I've said a while ago, it's very, the idea of demand and supply is very obvious nowadays because of what we are facing, right? When it comes to our goods and services, anything that you buy right now, anything that you demand right now, these are all parts of our demand and supply analysis. Okay, so we cannot go away with it because, yeah, as I've said a while ago, some students say, I don't need to understand demand and supply. I just want to buy this. No, right? Because if you are a consumer, you know what are the factors affecting your demand. And if you are a producer or if you own a business or a firm, you have to know what are the factors that will change or that will improve your supply. And all of these, without the demand, without the consumers, there will be no market. If there are only suppliers or producers, there is no market. So it's important that suppliers and demanders, or suppliers, producers, and consumers must interact, okay, to get your equilibrium. Okay, so I think that would be all for the demand and supply lecture. So I'm opening the floor for questions. You can have questions. You can have questions for in the Philippines, or I'll try to answer how do we how do we deal with COVID-19 here, something like that. So maybe I can ask you that. How do you think the pandemic affected the supply and demand of products in Indonesia, specifically in your area? Like, was it very hard to find the necessities, or anyone who wants to share? How do you think did the pandemic affected the market or the economy?
Yeah, hello,
Jakarta?
Ms. Joy Barrera.
Yes.
Okay. First, hello, I'm Yaiza Nisa.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm so glad to have you here sharing the valuable knowledge with us. Actually, I have no background on economics, but hopefully I can learn so fast here. I'm not going to sharing, but I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I'm so curious about the balancing supply and demands that you mentioned before itself. And as we know that the COVID-19 pandemic is disrupting economies across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
So how the supply and demand impact the price setting during the pandemic, because adjustment needed? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have for example, in our country, when the pandemic started, the face mask, the price of the face mask was very, very high, right? Like, I think it's also the same with you. Like, before, you can just buy a mask for 5 pesos. I'm not sure how much is it there. It's 5 pesos. But when the pandemic started, it was like 33 pesos. It was very expensive that time. So you can see there how the demand and supply work there. Because the demand is very high and the demand curve shifted up so high, you expect that prices will just go up. And then, because the supply, on the other hand, because there were limited supply, because people did not really prepare for it. So the manufacturers here, we do not have really local manufacturers of masks. The supplies were mostly from China, right? So supply was very limited. So because of if you imagine again the demand and supply, the supply curve, because there is a lower supply now, it will shift to the left, then the prices will also increase. Okay, so all of these things just affected how the pandemic just affected how we view a simple mask. Mask before was nothing to us, right? We do not even care about mask. Like, we do not really buy masks unless it is necessary. But because of the pandemic, because of the shoot up of the demand and the limited supply, you can imagine that if the demand increase and then the supply decrease, prices will definitely go higher. So that's the thing that happened prior, around March or April, something like that. But since right now we already have some factories shifted to, instead of manufacturers of clothing, instead of producing more clothes, they shifted to producing face masks, the cloth. They produced face masks to augment the needed masks in the country. So as you are now increasing the supply of the face mask, so right now I think the prices are, it's not the same as before, but it's now lower compared to the start of the pandemic. So as you are now increasing supply, then you expect that the price will little by little go down. So those are the things, especially when it comes to medical equipment, because those are in demand for the pandemic. And for the agricultural part, the products in the market, since markets are closed, one thing that I appreciated was because online, the demand for these products went online. Like all people will now post their goods, even agricultural products, on Facebook or any online sites, so they can sell up. And because of that, they were able to cope, I think, with the pandemic. But basically, because of that, because of this pandemic, everything went disruptive. Like our economies, our economy was disrupted big time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How about in Jakarta? Like, did you experience the same?
Actually, in Jakarta, still the same like in Philippines, I guess, because on the one hand, policymakers like need to consider measure that shield productive capacity is going.
Yeah.
We need to increase in the productive capacities here, but sometimes I'm just curious about the balancing, because the adjustment needed right now. The new normal, maybe there's a new how to knew how to basically in supply on demand will be balancing. Maybe there's a new strategies to balancing supply and demand, because we need increasing the productive capacities.
Yeah. When you talk about policies, especially right now, like for example, in our rice farmers, it's very good that we have to increase supply, because we want to have food security, right? But if we look at the demand and supply, how it works, if we try to increase more and more production of rice, it will push prices to go down, right? So I think the government has to come in and set a price for the farmers not to be hurt by this low price of rice. So I think in that case, there should be a hand-in-hand work of the market, because if we let the market work, the farmers will suffer because of the very low price of rice. We call that palay here. But since the government has to set a price for the farmers, I think that would be also a good way to address the prices in the market. So it's not all the time that we allow the market work. So for basic necessities, sometimes, especially if we are looking at the point of view of the, how do you call this? Because in the Philippines, most farmers are really the poor ones, right? So if you are looking at the welfare analysis of this situation, you have to weigh the two sides. Will you favor the consumers and bring the prices down lower, or will you favor the farmers, the producers, and just raise the prices? Because either way, one or two, both of them will be affected. If you put the prices down, then farmers will get hurt. If you put the prices high, then consumers will also get hurt. So it's up to the policymakers on how they will address these kinds and address the welfare of both sides. So I think Dr. Dipo can have it's like a policy, a public policy on how to address prices in the market. It's not, we do not just leave the market like that. Because if we leave the market, then the balancing will always work. You let the market do its job, something like that. But in this case, the government has to intervene.
I think government make subsidy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
government subsidies.
Yeah, subsidy.
Mm-hmm. the government has policies also to address these kinds of problems. So it's not always that we let the market work for it. Yeah.
All right. We have a couple of other questions posted in the chat.
Okay.
I just mentioned it to Dr. Barrera.
Okay. I
The
didn't
first
see the
question,
chat.
yeah. That's in Bahasa, so I have to translate it.
Okay.
Let me. The first question is how tax affect the market equilibrium? Okay, that's
so
the first question.
Yeah.
You want to answer it or give you another
Okay.
question again? That's the first question. The other question is, we have already studied that demand are affected by price, income, taste, and expected future price, and number of consumer, as in the equations you mentioned. With that equation, we as a producer are expected to understand how much supply and demand is required. This can only be done by collecting data and calculate it with some analysis, for example, a SWOT analysis. The question is how we decide the quantity of demand at equation as a complementary in decision making. Could you demonstrate it to us? That's a question. Okay. And the third question, I think we limited to 3 questions, correct? Is money can be categorized as product in the equilibrium theory, where supply equals bank and demand equals people. How quantity of money affect the price? Okay, that is the 3 questions.
Okay. So first, for the how tax affect the market equilibrium. So if you imagine I think don't imagine. I'm not saying imagine. If you remember the demand and supply side of the equation, taxes are always on the supply side, right? Taxes are borne. They are borne by the producers. They are additional cost to the producers. So as I've said a while ago, if there are, if the government taxes the businessman and you are working on your working capital and you have your working capital with you, and this is an additional cost to you, your tax will actually affect your cost of production. So basic analysis would be your supply, because of the additional cost to you as a producer, will affect your supply and shift your supply curve to the left. I think if you go to the higher economic subjects, there we can show that in a graph, and then the tax will be borne by the producers. However, in reality, when the government taxes the people, the producers will how do you say this? Share the burden with the consumers, right? They will share the burden to the consumers by having higher prices to them in such a way that the consumers will now bear the burden of tax. So taxes are actually not solely borne by the producers alone, but they pass it on to the consumers through higher prices. Okay, so we'll just include the graph because I do not have the welcome here to write on how the graph looks like when there is taxes, but we'll just share the PowerPoint maybe.
Sure, you can share it.
The taxes, or we can just look at the yeah, it goes like this. Can you see the picture here? Okay,
Yes.
so in this graph, you can see the demand and supply. So as I was saying, if it's a tax, it is borne by the producers. So the supply will shift to the left because of the tax, and these two triangles are actually your deadweight losses. And if you have studied producer surplus and consumer surplus, I'm not sure if you have taken up those topics already, but in that case, the tax revenue here, the box here, is goes to the government, okay, and then this one is borne by the consumers, okay, because it's part of their consumer surplus, okay, and then these two small triangles are your deadweight losses. So taxes are both producers and consumers, but they are more of your producers, and they are more of your consumers. They bore the burden. They transfer, okay, they transfer the burden of taxes to your consumers. Okay, but basically the graph looks like that. The supply curve will shift to the left because of the tax. Okay, I think that is on higher economics, the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and you understand the welfare effects because of the taxes. Okay, next question is about the decision making. Demand functions are affected by price, income. We as producers are expected to understand how much supply and demand is required. So only be done by collecting data. Yes, I agree that we can have your SWOT analysis to understand both the demand and the supply. That's why we also do feasibility analysis of products. We do business planning, right? And of course, these are important when you are starting a business. You have to know how much is demanded. So if I'm not mistaken, this is another topic in managerial economics, wherein you forecast demand. You use econometric analysis. As in our case, we use econometric analysis to forecast demand. So I'm not sure if we can have another lecture, or I think Dr. Dipo is pro in forecasting demand. So we use the forecasting method to, yeah, wait, this one. Let me share another screen to forecast demand. So just a brief, yeah. There. So if you see my screen, so we use this to forecast demand of goods and services. So a forecast is a statement, right? So you're asking how do we decide on the demand for the product. So one is we have the expected level of demand for products. There, we'll just go to the technicalities. So these are basic forecasting methods. This one. Okay, so how do you forecast demand? First, you have your objective for the forecast. What do you want to forecast? The time period, and then the data, and then the forecasting method. We have different forecasting methods. And then the forecasting method will tell you how much demand should be produced, or how much product should be produced based on the demand. Okay, so you have your mean absolute deviation. So these are based on past data. Okay, so you can use this to forecast demand. Mean squared error. So qualitative, as you have said, you can do SWOT analysis. You can actually interview consumers. You can interview upper level managers. Okay, so you call that executive opinion. You can interview sales force opinions. Okay, they are the ones who really know what the consumers want because they are the ones selling the products. Okay, you can do consumer surveys. These are qualitative techniques. Okay, consumer surveys. So in one way or another, we have participated in consumer surveys and they ask, what do you want? Or how do we improve? Something like that. So you also have quantitative method. So this is applicable when you have a set of data from the past. Okay, so time series can be expressed in quantitative terms. So this is a different method of analysis, your time series. So your time series can either be a trend. Okay, there are data from the past wherein you can understand how the trend went on. If the product is already in the market, then you can actually go to the producers and ask them for data in the past. Cycles and seasonal variations. So products can be seasonal. So products that are in season, there is a peak months, and so on. So these are some of the techniques that we use. You have the simple average. So maybe we can discuss this on a different lecture, maybe. So moving average. So these are just formulas that we use. So for example, this is a given demand in the past periods, and then you have to forecast for the next period, then you use the formula for simple moving. You have the weighted moving average, okay? Exponential smoothing, all of these are demand, okay? Determining the demand. So you have the trend adjusted exponential smoothing. And then you have the causal or associative. This is the statistical way of identifying or coming up with the demand. So you have used the regression analysis, okay? So correlation analysis. So this will give you a forecast. So if you have past data, okay? So trend analysis. So we use this to, how do you call this? To decide the demand, especially when you talk about the QD equation. The QD equation is actually taken from the regression analysis. The QD there, am I still sharing the screen? Okay, the QD there is actually something like this. Okay, it will give you a price and a quantity demanded equation. Okay, so in terms of demonstrating, I'm not sure if, yeah, but you can have the PowerPoint also if you're interested to learn how to forecast the demand using the different techniques. Okay, I hope I answered your question.
And the next question is
money. How about money? Is money
money can be categorized?
Yeah, definitely. money supply. If you it's another subject in economics. You have the monetary or money and banking, monetary economics. So supply, money supply. It's not only from banks. Okay, the supply is not only from banks, but money supply refers to the amount of money in circulation. You have the narrow money, you have the broad money, and these are all the money. The categories of money depend on its liquidity. Okay, so that's the money supply. It's not only from banks. And then demand for money, of course, it's from the people. And demand here is affected by different motives of the people. They can be transactionary motive. So if you only want money to buy your goods and services, it's transactionary. You also have your precautionary. So all of these affect the demand for money. So it's all in the monetary economics. So I'm not sure if I don't have a slide here because I think it's Professor Ilacas, Professor JP who handles monetary economics. And the quantity of money affects price, of course. Okay. Sometimes I start here. How does it affect price? How does the quantity of money, how does money supply affects price? So if you notice, sometimes we ask, Why don't just the government print as much money and just give us so much money, right? I've been thinking about that before when I haven't understood how this quantity of money affect price. So because if there are more money in the economy, the prices will definitely go higher. Okay, it's an inflationary effect. So it's not just we can just print more and more money so we can have more money. It's not that way. So there will always be the balancing still of the supply of money and the demand for money, so that the quantity of money is kept in a target, or it's something that will not really affect the prices. Because if prices go higher, then people will also get affected, right? So it's not necessarily that you have to print more money to address poverty and all, because the quantity of money definitely affects the price. Higher supply of money in the market will give you higher prices. So that's for the money. So how will government regulations affect the supply and demand in the market? They are set to be violating the ceiling. For example, if the government gives subsidies for health insurance, which is lower than the usual health service price. Oh, so this is when it comes to setting prices. Okay. Government regulations, I think it's really on how strong the government can implement these policies, right? Because, yeah, as you have said, there are producers violating the price ceiling or price floor in the market. So for the health insurance, which is lower than the usual health service price, in our health insurance, we have recently a problem. If you are following the PhilHealth, we have the PhilHealth problem in the Philippines right now, because the problem there is not really on the pricing of the health insurance. The problem is more of the corruption. So it's more of the public administration that needs to be addressed. Okay, we do not really have a problem when it comes to pricing, since people really want to have health insurance. But since the administrators or the head of the PhilHealth, they're just corrupt. So I think it's a different problem when it comes to demand and supply in the health insurance of the Philippines. So these are all the ceteris paribus assumption, the all other things held constant. So we cannot really assume that these people are honest enough, because like what we are facing right now in the Philippines, the PhilHealth is underwater, under fire because of the corruption. Billions of pesos that they have gotten from the money of the people. Right? So in this case, it's more of the government on how they can address the problems. So in terms of the price ceiling, price floor, this is not new. This is not a new problem to us. I guess most countries also have those violating the price ceiling and price floor in the market. And I'm not sure if how the government addresses this. Maybe if there are complaints, then they can address this. But if there are no complaints, if people will just follow it just as it, then I think the government cannot intervene. For example, because we have the oil deregulation law, I'm not sure in Indonesia if you also have the oil deregulation law, because the government cannot actually affect or impact the price of oil. So the price of oil here is basically market driven. So if something happens in Middle East, then we expect that prices will definitely change here. So the government cannot do something for it. But I think when the time comes that there are businessmen who take advantage of this very high price of gasoline, then not unless there are complaints from the people, then the government should address this, because it is market driven, really. Some people would, I heard this from one of my students, because they asked me what happens when the gasoline, the the owners of gasoline stations, they buy it very low and then sell it very high. Like they hoard it. That's another problem here. Like they hoard the gasoline and then they just sell it later on at a higher price when the price increases. So the same goes. If the people will, if there are no complaints, the government cannot address them. I'm not sure if how you do that in Indonesia. Do you have a more strict way of addressing those producers?
For oil and
Well,
gas, there is government price
Policy.
already policy.
Mm-hmm.
There's Indonesia in Indonesia oil and gas price is not affected by global price.
Oh, that's wow.
So on the global price and the oil and gas is going up or increase, and in Indonesia is still the same price as that given by the government regulation.
Oh, because we have the oil deregulation law, so
Yeah,
they
and
cannot.
we still give a subsidy for oil and gas.
Let me add a little bit about the gas policy. In Indonesia, there are two basic policy about the gas price. We have a subsidized price. We call it the premium gas. And the other one is the market-driven price.
Yeah.
In Indonesia, we have like a Pertamax, Turbo, and other private company that open the gas station. So the second price is market driven, and there is a one in between, the Pertalite, that's in between. So the government not fixing the price, but just fix the quantity of the subsidy, the budget for the subsidy. So yes, indeed, that the price for the premium gas, which is fully subsidized, it costs the tax, or it costs the government debt, of course, but the price in the people, the same. However, since Indonesia is a very wide country, especially in Java Island, there is no shortage in the subsidized gas. That's fully supported the quantity. But in the rural area or in the other islands, in the outer of the Java Islands, often that the gas is shortage because the price is below the market price. So the demand is higher than the supply. So that could be pretty much the situation in Indonesia. That's in addition to Mr. Adi Natakusuma said. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, but advantage of the higher prices, like they buy low and then they sell high. I think some of the producers are really violating the policies of the government.
Okay.
Yes.
There is more questions. We still have like 10 minutes to finish.
Okay. Yes.
I think it will be the last questions, or last two questions. There are so many business today, such airline business, hotel, but because of the pandemic, all business are going slow. Yes, and there are new demands. So some of the business players have to change their main business. How does this affect the supply and demand view? That's a question.
How does the change? If I get it right, how does the change in the products or affect?
Let me forward the question to you.
Yes, please.
In the chat. Okay.
How will the government affect the supply and demand market? How? Is it the same that I answered a while ago, the price ceiling?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I copied the wrong questions. Okay. Let me copy paste here.
Oh, there are so many businesses still today, such as
that's the question.
because of there are new demands. Some business players have to change their main business. So, what do you mean by some business players have to change their main business? Like they shift, do they change new demand for some? where is Yang? Can you explain the context of how do they change to a new demand, or how do they change their main business? Like
changing to other business.
For example, they have the hotel business, and then they change into what kind of business? Another
different business, I think.
Oh, okay. It's like, how does the affect the demand and supply? Of course, the supply chain will be affected because there will be a disruption on the producers. Okay, they will change, or they will shift their resources to producing another kind of business. So when you talk about the hotel business, I'm not sure if how they change their business, their hotel business, into something else, because these are actually more of the tangibles, like they have the hotels, so maybe they can shift to more of
I think that is one example. If some hotel in Jakarta, they accept self because the capacity of the hospital is limited.
Yeah.
Demand for those who affected the coronavirus to stay isolated, self-isolated in the hotels. So some hotels,
they converted.
Promote, they convert not for medication, but just for being isolated in that, in that place.
Quarantine. Yeah, they have it as quarantine facilities. Yeah, I think it's also something like that here. But for these hotel businesses to operate just like before, I think this conversion is a short-term plan. Like, because the pandemic is here right now, they cannot do anything else but to accommodate these people who wants to do quarantine. But in the long run, if the COVID-19 just slows down, I think in the long run they will still have it managed as a hotel. So these are just their short-term solutions. These are short-term planning. So in terms of demand and supply, of course, one of the most severely impacted industry is actually your hotel and restaurant industries. Even in the Philippines, hotels were closed, but yeah, some hotels here, they also converted into a quarantine facility, and it's their way of recuperating from the losses. I think it's not something that will go in the long run, not unless the COVID-19 will still be in the next 5 years. But when you look at the conversion, it will not, I mean, I don't think the conversion will be in the long run. It's just for the time being, that since they are needed right now, then they do it. But the conversion of hotel businesses, it's not really gonna affect, because there are really no demand for hotels right now. So they have to do something to survive. I mean, the hotel managers or the hotel owners has to do something to survive. So I think it's more of the producer side, because people will, as a consumer, I do not intend to go to a hotel right now, especially that it's a quarantine facility, right? But it's more of the survival strategy of the hotel owners. That's why they have converted in the short term. I think it's a short-term solution. I hope I answered your question.
All right. Probably this is the final short question.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are the best steps to take for business players who have other business beside basic needs business in the middle of the pandemic? So where we still don't know when the pandemic will be over. That's
best step to take for business players. This question refers to the non-essentials, right? Because they are the ones greatly affected by the pandemic, the non-essentials. So if we look at solutions for business players, especially those in the non-essentials? It's a very hard question, actually, because it's also the same problem that actually the province of Ilocos Norte has consulted to us, because some maybe it's more of the government can do something to help them to subsidize when it comes to their taxes, when it comes to their rents and all their the things that they have to pay for, because they are not really on track right now. But as business owners, and you are producing products that are non-essentials, let's go back to our example as the hotel business. You cannot expect the tourism industry, the tourists, for example, they can actually, for the short run, they can convert their businesses, but it's not necessarily that they have to do this in the long run. And then when the pandemic's over, I think they can be, it's with the government to help them right now. For example, we have here small players, small businessmen who go online. Okay, I think that's one thing that they can boost their sales online. A lot of businesses are now going online. We also have those who partner with other businesses who can help them when it comes to marketing their products. So it's a different strategy when we look at the bigger picture, because even the ironic scenario here in the Philippines is that those that are bigger businesses are those that are closing because they have lots of bills to pay. And then the small businesses, they are the ones who are thriving because their capital or their working capital is just really small. So ironically, those big businesses like hotels, coffee shops, they are the ones who started to close down, right? But since the government has been pushing for more tourists right now here, I don't think that they can actually stop operating, but they can have the online. For example, the restaurants, the coffee shops, deliveries, those were the trend when the pandemic was really at its peak, like deliveries of these products. But we can always have the government to help them really, because they are the ones being affected severely. So best step, I'm not sure about the best step, because we also own a milk tea, a bubble tea shop. We own a bubble tea shop here. And during the pandemic, we had to close down. But since if you're asking for the best step, well, yeah, I set up a page online. I marketed it online, and then we do deliveries. Our shop was closed down physically, but we have the online right now that we have to sell. So when the pandemic, we hope to open again soon. We did not really close down like permanently, but we took advantage of the Facebook. We took advantage of emails like that to market our product. So it's up to the business owners. And we did not really ask from the government, but they have loans for the small businessman. They have loans that you can apply for. They have subsidies that you can apply for, especially when it comes to paying the rents. So it's a good thing that our landowner did not actually charge us for the time that we did not operate. So it depends also on the people. We did not pay for it during the time that we did not open. So, but we have it online. So we do it at home. We brought all the things at home. We sold our bubble tea online, and then something like that.
Yeah, I think.
So
Okay, that would be the final questions, and so we can wrap up this meeting.
Yeah.
Let us applaud for Dr. Barrera.
Thank you so much. I hope.
Okay, we really appreciate your very interesting presentation. And to the audience also, thank you very much for the questions and response. I think it's a very constructive meeting. And for Dr. Barrera, you still have one more meeting next week, correct? Probably if you want to post something, since we don't use the Kahoot, but we have our system of learning, online learning UHAMKA, so you can send it to me or to me, and I will post it to the students, questions or exercise, so they can give a response for your questions or exercise, and we can discuss it in the next meeting. That's all. I think I don't have to make a conclusion of this meeting, so let everybody here make their own conclusion. But in general, it's very interesting, and discussion is also very good.
Very good.
But here I see some visitors, not visitors, I think Dean of School of Engineering, Dr. Zulfahmi, welcome. And the professor, I don't know, I cannot mention all the audience here. If from Dr. Bambang, you have to say anything in conclusion?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dipo. Thank you very much for your lecture, guest lecture at our university, Prof. Mishael. I follow your explanation from beginning to until now. The talking was clearly, not too fast, very clear. What do you think, teman-teman? That's right? Clear?
That's right.
Yes, very clear.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you
clear.
so much.
Fact is that in our city, there are so many business in Jakarta running by small business who do not understand about the supply and demand analysis. They only think about how to make a product that are valid and needed by customer. Automatically, market demand is always happening. On the other hand, for invalid product, the price or demand will not automatically will not happen. I don't know, is this condition the same in Philippines, Mr. Mishael?
Yes, it's the same here, Dr. Bambang.
So the important is what is done after the supply and demand analysis. For example, the hotel in Bogor, during the pandemic, some hotel chains their services for everybody boring stay at home or boring work from home. So they want to get or to reach the customer who want to work while on vacation, to create a new demand. So this is very important, and once again, thank you for you, Mrs. Prof. Mishael, and everybody. Thank you very much for Mr. Dipo, and I very happy. Thank you very much, Mr. Dipo.
Bapak Ibu sekalian, dengan ini pertemuan kita hari ini berakhir. Ucapkan terima kasih kepada semua audiens, Bapak Kaprodi, Dekan Fakultas Ekonomi, ya, juga Ibu Gusniarti. Mari kita tutup sama-sama pertemuan ini dengan membaca doa Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Pak Dipo, foto session sebentar. belum di close.
Ya,
Oke.
silakan.
Silakan.
Saya kasih aba-aba ya. 1, 2, 3. Oke, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Misha.
much.
Thank you, Professor.
See you next
Thank
time.
you, Miss
Yes.
Barrera.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you.
Terima kasih ya teman-teman semuanya.
Ya Pak, sama-sama.
Sama Pak.
Jangan
Sama-sama
lupa ya
Pak.
nanti jam 1 ditengok olunya.
Baik Pak Widya.
Ya.
Terima kasih, Pak.
Baik,
Ya Pak.
Makasih banyak Pak.
Adipo.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mbak Dian, makasih. Oh iya, Mbak Dian ini angkatan 42 teman-teman.
Sama-sama Pak.
Terima kasih.
Thank you,
Dia.
Brown.
Mbak Dian, terima kasih.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.